Hello and welcome to another special one-off Madaxeman Army List, or Guerre Army List to be more specific, podcast. This time I'm joined again by Dave and Richard, and what we're going to do for you here is go through one of those armies that everybody thinks about, everybody maybe has, but isn't necessarily, or until now potentially hasn't necessarily been one that really kind of rocks it on the competition circuit, the classical Indians. We're looking at a couple of lists here for the classical Indians, talk about some tactics to use them with to try and make them into a slightly more interesting army than the slightly it runs on rails standard way of using it. And also we then have a quick chat about some of the figures and ranges which are available for it. So sit back, if it's an army you've thought about, if you've got that elephant fetish that, let's face it, we all do, this may well be the podcast for you. So let's just roll the podcast.
This means war.
Okay, then, well, look, welcome to another Madaxeman podcast on a specific ADLG army, an army list. This week I'm joined by Dave and Richard. I say this week, I suspect I'll probably release this with some other ones. So to you, it might be today and yesterday. I'm again joined by Richard and Dave. So this week we're going to have a look, or this episode, we're going to have a look at the classical Indians, which is one of those armies that, personally, actually, it's my very first War Games army in what would have been 5th or 6th edition, was classical Indian, or Indian, as it was in the days of WRG when there wasn't any other history. And, a wall of bowmen, obviously a load of elephants, very, very colourful army, but not the greatest army for using as anything else. And soon you get drawn into toolkit armies where, you can recycle the figures. The Indians are kind of the Indians, although to be fair with ADLG, there's a few more kind of later medievally, dark agey type Indian lists than certainly there used to be in the days of WRG 5th and 6th and 7th. But it's also a list that sometimes you look at and you go, there's kind of only one way to do that. Or certainly I do, and look at it and think, is there a way of pulling this list together that makes it interesting to play? Because I've played quite a few opponents with it, and it sort of sometimes can feel like a list that can work on autopilot, or there's an autopilot way to do it. So I think this week with Richard and Dave, we're going to try and look at seeing if there's ways of making this a list that is interesting and needs to be played, rather than necessarily a list which could be a program scenario that just kind of inches forward. So I think on that basis, there's a lot of history covered in about 5 or 6 lines of description, with India having many emperors during the classical period, the Mauryas, and then the Guptas as well. But it was a subcontinent of competing empires and huge amounts of conflict that there seems to be a lot written about if you know the right sort of sources. But in terms of the backstory and the history of it, I don't know, Richard, have you is this one that you've researched or got a view on a bit more of the history around?
It's not one it's one of the ones I know least about. But I mean, I think what is interesting, as you were saying, is that many times in the history, it's a real patchwork of states. And in fact, some of them are republics rather than kingdoms. And often it's the republican states that made more use of chariots than the monarchical states, which tended to use elephants more. So that's a twist you can put in there. And with so many states, quite a lot of internal allies were used. And it was a world, although it was aware of the wider world, warfare was largely confined within its borders until the advent of Alexander. And he has a huge impact on Indian psyche by coming in and being the first successful invader for hundreds of years. And that sort of, resonates on through sort of military practice for quite a while. Hence the rise of artillery. You have the Indo-Bactrians and all kinds of other lists that you can see in the book that kind of touch upon India thereafter.
Yeah, a lot of those later lists tend to move the centre of gravity of where the empire is away from I guess the heart of India as we see it on the map now, and up into kind of the northwest and the borders of what's now Pakistan and Iran. There just seems to be India is sometimes included in a very, very different geography than the one that's known now from some of those later lists.
Well, you quite often get, because of climate, you quite often get a more horse-oriented culture in the north and a more infantry and elephant-oriented culture in the south. And you see that in some of the lists around the Muslim Indians and the Hindus and the rise of the Tamils and all of those different factors that play in there. And right up in the north, in the early, where you've got the previous list, the Vedic Indians, which is where you have Indo-European peoples who come in on chariots at the same time as, from memory, you get the Hyksos coming into Egypt. You get another branch of that movement of people off the steppe, ending up coming down and settling in North India and establishing what are today recognized as some of the higher castes, because they're often a priestly and warrior elite. And that leads to some of the basis of as I understand it, of the class system back in almost prehistory times.
Okay, intriguing stuff.
I think definitely the Vedics are the early Marianu horse chariotry comes from the Caucasus into India at the same time as it comes into the Middle East, and that changes Indian society. But I think in this period, as Richard says, this is a period of small states fighting interminable wars against each other until the advent of Alexander, and Alexander changes the whole dynamic.
So that,
I think one of the interesting things is we often talk about Death Stars, and I think this is the ultimate Death Star army.
Yeah,
and
very
it's
much.
So for training, I think we sit here every time we do a podcast and talk about Death Stars, but some people might be listening and thinking, "What the hell is a Death Star?" and scratching their heads.
This means war.
So I think the Mauras were actually inspired by Alexander to start unifying some of these states and forming this empire. And so the list I've gone
let's have a look at that list. So this is the Mauras. So this is the earlier option, the more textbook one, I guess. Before you start getting, well, I'm saying textbook because as someone who started collecting Indians in the days of Fifth, I just think bowmen, elephants, and some very rubbish cavalry who've been almost the touchstone for rubbish cavalry throughout all war gaming lists in history. But this one you've got, so this is a big old list, 26 here. You've got ordinary generals. They're all included. My Lord, that's unusual. So Richard, talk us through this list. Your first command here with, you've got an 8, a 9 and a 9. So it's all big stuff. How does this fit together as your Maurya army?
So it's a funny one because it's partly the autopilot list you talked about. By including the generals and making them ordinary, you are forcing yourself as a player to be very disciplined, because you don't have the command points to recover. You've basically got to think through your plan at the beginning and almost execute it come what may, and hope that you've got a good enough plan. So the basic essence is 2 flanking commands which have a war elephant and some mixed bow sword. In the case of the first command, 1 elephant. In the case of the second command, 2. That then has some bowmen which initially can move with it. But if you need to get into combat, you can commit the elephant with the mixed unit, certainly against foot troops. You can choose to initiate combat, whereas if you're facing mounted, you can choose to shoot.
Well, I think if you're facing mounted, you have to choose to shoot your mixed
That's
unit.
what I mean. So
you wouldn't want to, but can't as well. Initiate combat. Yeah.
So you have a response against them. It's not that you can't do anything, but against foot troops, if you want to pin them down, you have the option. Whereas if you only had bowmen, you wouldn't really be able to commit anything voluntarily to combat. You'd have to wait for the enemy to charge you. So that's why I've got...
Do you want to, with this army, do you actually want to commit anything to combat? I can see an elephant and then either side of it two mixed units, which is effectively two mediocre swordsmen. What sort of scenario do you want to commit that into, other than against Dave's textbook two bowmen on their own on a flank or something?
Well, the idea is you soften the enemy up with shooting. So say you're facing a line of heavy spearmen. You would look to do 1 or 2 wounds on them, but the trouble with shooting is the enemy can often rally up the losses almost as quickly as you can inflict them. And so there comes a time where you want to go in, or it may simply be that you want to put something in on the flank of the center command so that you don't give it too many odds of being outflanked. So, because that really is a fighting command. So it's not that you would in every game do it, because of course you've then committed the general. But part of the idea is if you include the general, I would include it with the elephant once he's locked in. So it's not about you will always commit, but it just gives you a bit more punch should you choose to do so. And it's like everything. Every time you retain an option, your opponent has to worry about more than one thing. As soon as the enemy is only worrying about one thing, he can start to outthink you, because you haven't got a different response to throw at him.
Okay, so your medium swordsman, bowman, elephant, Death Star here is actually, it's only ever really committing in support of something or to push something over the edge. It's not, these aren't commands which are designed to get stuck in. They are shooting commands with the opportunity to either support this central. So that's where this central command then, that now I'm looking at that, well, that is quite different, isn't it? That's very different to the rest of them.
So that's a very hard hitting. I mean, again, I've made it unreliable on the basis that it doesn't really have shooting. So I'm not going to lose out by it being unreliable. Most people are going to not want to make it reliable, but by putting it in the middle, I make it hard for them to get at the 2 flank commands without activating that. And I just save 3 points, which I can use on something else accordingly.
Yeah. Okay. So that's got 2 elite elephants. You've gone, well, they are all elite. The 2 guardsmen, which are elite 2-handed weapon, there's no arguing with those, and 2 medium swordsmen as well. You've taken some of the
one medium swordsman.
1 medium swordsman on there. So it's a 5-wide double Death Star then.
Yeah. But with a very strong light infantry screen, so that, most opponents, if you keep that close, most opponents aren't going to be able to drive it off with their own light infantry. They'd have to commit something else, and strong enough that, it can fall back through the line when the time comes and provide some level of second line. It's strong enough to deal with if the enemy throws scythe chariots at you or something like that. You've got enough light infantry to protect the main force behind.
Okay. And then your final command is effectively a mirror image of the first one.
Exactly. The only difference is it's got the extra elephant fundamentally.
Yeah. Okay.
And 1 less bowman as a consequence. The 2 flank commands have also got one of the weak horse units. Again, they're there to do a number of things. They can be thrown wide and around the flank. They can be used to stop enemy horse evading away from the elephants. There's a number of things they can do, but they're most happy just sat doing nothing behind the elephants where they're safe.
Quite right. So Dave, what I must admit, I'm looking at this thinking, actually, there is a plan with this. This isn't just a line of all the same that rolls forward and pass the initiative to the opponent.
I've always found it interesting because I think Iñaki uses this army. And when I've met Iñaki, first of all, and fought this army, you think of it as a very passive army, but it can be very aggressive. That central command, the sort of core 2 Death Star with the elite two-handed swordsman, guardsman, that can be a very aggressive command. And I think what you find is you've got a very large amount of width, which makes the horsemen, which you hold in the back, helpful for getting around flanks. So you are moving forward with your bow fire to put pressure on the enemy, but you're 26 units, so you're going to be a lot wider in essence. But then you use that centre command as a strike punch to win you the game.
Yeah. So here, you've just looking at some of the things you've left out. I think in an earlier podcast we talked about side chariots in the Seleucid army. There's an option for one of them in this army. I think there's also an option for
stampeding herd, isn't it?
For stampeding herd. There's also an option for 2 light cavalry javelin, which gives you an initiative point. But here you've got an initiative of 0 anyway. So I imagine that's almost part of the plan. Are you aiming to lose the initiative here and pick forest or something, or?
No, I just expect to lose the initiative, and I don't really care.
Yeah, you're doing the same sort of thing anyway, really.
Yes.
Pretty much, yeah.
And if my opponent comes forward, I've got enough shooting that he won't stay forward for very long, or if he does, I'll roll up and hit him. So, but I'm just looking at the list now. I think probably I have 1 light infantry too many, so I probably would switch one of those for a scythe chariot.
Yeah, although maybe there's an argument for an extra light infantry in that first command and take.
Well, no,
one
I
out.
think I may be 1 over the legal limit.
Oh, right. Oh, you might have too many anyway. Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, you've got 7. So I see. So it's a slightly dodgy list then. Yeah, you're only allowed 6 of them. So yeah, that might be the side chariot or the levy or something like that to drop them in.
I think it's all those elite war elephants which are going to win you the game, and they're a great toy. As Richard says, you soften up with the bow fire. You take the bow fire on, and then the elephants go in and wallop the enemy and give you the victory.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, let's move on and look at the Gupta list.
This means war. This means war.
So then, this is the slightly later one, the 525 AD Gupta list, and the Guptas come in after 320, and they're allowed, amazingly, some decent heavy cavalry impact. Proper ones upgrade to elite. I'm just trying to look how many you're actually choosing there. You can have up to 4. You've got 3 of them here, Richard, in this one. Oh, I see your initiative has snuck up to 1. Very, very bold. And this is a 23 unit army. You've got 5, 8, and 10 in here. So again, talk us through these commands and how you see them working together, and what's different to the previous one.
So some similarities in that there's one. If you take command 2, it's a couple of elephants supported by a mixed and bowmen. So a 6 wide group that is mainly about shooting, but has some melee capability, and basically can move up on the flank of the other 2 units and provide pressure, and can equally hold a flank. You've then got what would probably be the centre command, which again has the war elephant with guardsmen, and this time 2 mixed units. So that has a bit of shooting, but also a lot of punch. And then the third command, which is very mobile, and again, I would consider having that with an included competent general to give it a bit more command and control. But with only 5, it doesn't really need a lot of command and control. And again, that depending on the situation, you would either send that wide, you might even flank march with it, or if you didn't like what you were facing, that could be withdrawn into, it's small enough, the whole lot can just move into the center between the other 2 commands and provide a strong reserve in order to punch through any hole that the elephants make. And again,
three companions there, effectively, same heavy cavalry impact elite. That's pretty substantial, isn't it? That's going to be better than a lot of things in that it's going to come up against in a flank on the early theme.
Exactly. So in period, you would definitely use it on a flank aggressively. It's just if you were in a more open period or you were facing, say, a lot of heavy knights where you wouldn't want it to commit frontally, then you would use it as a support command. Okay.
And Dave, I'm guessing you're sitting here twitching, looking at that first command going, it would be much, much better with an ordinary bowman and a mediocre bowman in it in some way, shape,
well,
or
you've
form.
got plenty of bowmen. You've got plenty of bowmen elsewhere in the army.
Right.
I think I'd be tempted to put the included general with the cavalry, perhaps, and keep the one of the other generals out. But I think there you've got, you want to put the cavalry down on one flank where they're actually very maneuverable if they need to move to the other flank or something like that, and then have them working in combination with the guardsmen. So you've got one strike Death Star with the elite guardsmen, and you've got one fairly static Death Star with the Indian Archers unit. So that one with the Indian Archers is going to hold one flank while the other 2 go and do the damage.
Yeah, I think, this is actually, a much more mobile thing. You're right. There's a number of different aggressive elements. It's not that passive thing. And I think, like you, I'm looking at it wondering whether there's just, even making that cavalry commander competent included, because that's a wash on the points and just gives them a bit more mobility, whether even that second command or one of the commands, they're both ordinary included generals to get stuck in, but it would be a big swing on points. But whether if you get up to a competent one, do you suddenly get more ability to maneuver those couple of archers on their own to do that Dave thing and support the heavy cavalry? Because this looks like something that I'm actually looking at this going, there's ways that you could combine this aggressively, that maybe the command structure actually does need to is worth investing a few more points in, because you've actually got some options to do stuff here rather than just chug forwards.
I think that's always true, but it's always the dilemma. It's one of the that you face with a lot of these lists is every point you spend on command, you lose on troops, but it perhaps allows you to have the right troop in the right place at the right time. But at 23 with 6 light infantry, you haven't got a lot of room for spare. You've got a little room for spare. But certainly, you can always lose one combat unit and play with the command. It's definitely it's kind of those situations. In some games, you're really going to wish you had it. And in other games, it would have been a poor use of points. But I think it comes back to what style do you want to play? Are you somebody who likes to commit their generals? Are you somebody who hates to commit their generals? There isn't a right or wrong thing. There's just knowing yourself and what are you going to feel comfortable with.
And I guess if they're on an elite elephant, they're still pretty tough anyway, aren't they? No matter what happens.
They're still pretty tough, yes. And I didn't used to include my generals very much, but I think in this kind of army, they don't have a lot of punch. Most of the punch is the elephants. And so what you don't want is the elephant to get bogged down in a long drawn out battle. And including a general just means you're more likely to knock out the enemy unit at contact.
Yep.
And I think that's worth and it's a hard it's a hard army to turn to the flanks anyway. So my view is you try and go for breadth and avoid having to turn, and you try and apply a lot of frontal pressure so that your opponent doesn't have much time to think about getting around you. He's too busy dealing with the mass coming at him.
Okay. And with both of these lists then, you've avoided, and Dave, interested in your thought on this one. This is a list that's allowed up to 4 elite heavy chariot impetuous, which is an awful lot more punch as well, but is an awful lot of points and gives you a different thing. And the times I've played the chariots, they feel scary, but people struggle to support them. But I don't know, is it something that you've both looked at and thought they're lovely, but there isn't a way of doing it? Or is there a way of doing it with chariots?
I think when you see people with the 4 chariots, they tend to put them down the middle, thinking, oh, they're impetuous. And they seem to be left behind because people don't dare bring them forward, so they cannot work. I played Iñaki in Spain, and he used the 4 heavy chariots. And of course, my companions, who shouldn't have beaten him by any chance, killed all 4 of his chariots, even though I was a level down, and in the process, I think, killed 2 of his generals, which was fun and games.
So you're saying avoid the chariots because they get bad dice then? Is that your strategy?
Yeah, exactly.
That's your analysis.
One way of putting it. That's definitely a way of putting it. I think the chariots combined with some of the other horsemen can be quite useful as well. The chariots make it a very, very heavy banging, I think, is the way I just put it, force, with the elephants on either side coming forward. But I don't think they tend to work as well.
And I think for me, it would very much depend on the theme. There are some themes where I would be very interested to look at the chariots, like a pre-300 BC or whatever. As you get into later things, if they're like, at the end of the day, to take chariots, you're normally giving up on elephants. And
it's a trade-off, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a trade-off. And except with the chariots, they don't work with anything else you've got. So you have to have 3 or 4 of them to have a wide enough block. The nice thing about the elephants is they move with the foot. And so I think that combination of foot and elephant is more versatile in more situations than the chariots. So if I was going to go for chariots, I might not start with the Indians as my choice of list.
It's one of those ones.
Interestingly, I think actually the light chariot bow can also be an interesting choice, because they give you, if you go for a small group of them in a command, they're not at all what people usually expect of the Indians. And they do give you quite a bit of mobile shooting. Again, they make an excellent flank march, or even as a small command, an on-table flank march. So something worth considering.
Worth having a look at. Intriguing.
I think there's another combination of chucking in the war wagons as well, isn't there? Because the war wagons can be something which people don't expect in this army.
Yeah, with war wagon bow mediocre, isn't it? I'm not sure.
Not
entirely sure
they fun toy to deploy.
Yeah, that would protect your flank for some fairly. Actually, they're 8 points each, but a couple of those would give you a bit of a secure flank for quite a while. Certainly.
Exactly, 2 of them with what if it affects? So you essentially with the Indian army, you've got 1 static bow firing elephant command, one strike elephant command and another elephant's bow command. And if you put the war wagons in, that can hold that flank which you're worried about, where you've just got the bow fire elephant. And that frees up all your elephants to go forward and charge in themselves. You're spending 16 points on them. They're your strike force. They're the most, I think they are the most expensive troop type in the entire game. And that's why you include the generals. You're not going to dither about whether to use your elephants. They're going in,
just doing it,
and fighting. And if they die, they die and you lose the game. But if they win, they stomp straight through.
So I suppose you're almost trading off a couple of, well, literally point for point, you're trading off a couple of war wagons to delay or give you a bit more cover on a flank, when almost in reality, it's highly likely that someone's going to push around your flank and threaten you, and you might end up having to peel off an elephant to deal with that anyway. So if you spend the 16 points on 2 wagons, you've kind of already committed to doing that, or defending.
I think there comes a point in any game with elephants where, you know, you hold the line steady as you go forward, keeping your Death Stars tight. But there comes a point in the game when your light infantry have all been killed by bow fire. I mean, if you're fighting a shooty cavalry army, their objective is to kill your light foot in front of your elephants, to get at your elephants and start shooting your elephants at a factor of 0. So there comes a point where the elephants go for it, and your objective is to get enemy cavalry on the back foot, running away from you, and keep them going in that way and exploit that as much as you can. And I think this list with the 3 horsemen, if they hold one flank as the elephants go forward, pushing things before them, then their speed and manoeuvrability is going to finish off the other opponent's army.
Okay, interesting. Well, look, I think I'm toying with the idea of actually upgrading my Indian Allied command to a proper army now. Now that I've seen there's ways of actually playing with it constructively, or more constructively than perhaps I've seen sometimes. When people have played against me with this sorts of army, I think the chariots are always a pain in it, whatever, to actually assemble and put together, aren't they? If you're actually making them, so deciding
all fit onto a base.
All fit onto a base. So deciding that they're not the best troops is maybe not the end of the world, but picking up a couple more elephants, I guess.
This means war.
My elephants are some of the very few tin soldier. Tin soldier are wonderful troops, but very difficult to mix with anything else. But their Indians or certainly their India elephants, look really quite pokey, quite dangerous. But I think they're all a bit monopose, which is a shame. So I end up with, I think, elephants from Tin Soldier, and then I've got some of the old pre-Z range museum bowmen and swordsmen and stuff like that. And then I think I've been thinking about painting up some proper cavalry for that one allied contingent of medium cavalry that is mandatory for quite some time, and never really got around to it. But I guess it's, is it difficult to look past the new museum Z range, or is this a one where there's other people as well? Zeiston, I think, have got some decent troops in this.
My Macedonians are all Zeiston, so I started with that army, and then I found, with the Alexandrian and Macedonian army, you've got the option of having an Indian ally, which gives you the, you've got 2 elite elephants, and you've got 2 elephants in the Alexandrian army. So your Alexandrian army turns into an elephant army. And once you've done that the Indian ally for the Alexandrian army, you sit there and go, right, I'll turn it into an entire Indian army. Yeah. And that just appears in front of you. The Zeiston elephants are beautiful, really beautiful. And I think once you've done that, then that develops into the other armies like Ghaznavid, Hindu Indian, and you start to discover your Indian mojo. That's a word.
Is it really fair to use I'd say let's call them classical Indian infantry and elephants for some of the later period Indian armies, or would they, is there a sense that they all still dressed broadly similar? Combine them up with Arab cavalry and Arab infantry, and that it goes for the Hindu troop types and that.
Hindu army is quite fun because you've got impetuous heavy cavalry who, if you're fighting in an elephant battle, you can dismount them as impetuous heavy infantry. Sorry, medium infantry swordsman. Impetuous with armor and elite.
Yeah, which is pretty tough.
Which is a very interesting and useful troop type.
Yeah, I mean, I think in large parts of the world, the lower social classes tended to have fairly consistent outfits over large time spans.
Well, so, certainly they do in many of my armies, yeah.
Yeah, in Western Europe, a sort of loose trousers and a loose tunic, covers you for about 1,000 years. Or bare legs and a tunic covers you for another 1,000.
Yeah.
And I think in India, you can use some of the troop types for long time spans. It's more things like the cavalry and to some extent the elephants, where you perhaps see more styles of dress change in the riders of the elephants. But I think most people as well, as long as it's clear what it is, most people are fairly tolerant of things standing in. I mean, my figures are mostly the older museum range. I particularly like their Gupta cavalry mixed with some minifigs and some Essex. But I've just bought some of the new museum ones because I quite like those too. Some of particularly the command figures and the command elephants to just freshen up the army and provide a bit more variety.
Yeah, no, I think it's there's a lot of options for picking that or picking different troops for this one, and I think what we've discovered, there's actually some options for making this an army that you play rather than an army that you wind up and set off to go. And it's a different thing, that philosophy of saying I'm taking the decision that I'm just going to stick all my generals in. It actually is the right way to play it with this one, and that bit about winning quickly, which again, kind of drawing parallels with the discussion about the Seleucid list. There is still a legitimate approach of go narrow, go in, go hard, and try and break the enemy before they can do anything about it. And I guess this, the Seleucids have got pikemen doing that. This has got an army that all goes forward at 3. It gets there even quicker.
It's a very quick army.
Yeah. So not worrying about flanks is a thing.
No, exactly. I think the one thing about it is that, you can often run out of pips in the situations where you want to move short and you don't have the pips to do it. And although the elephants are very tough, a lot of the rest of it isn't. And therefore you do need to rely on advancing briskly to bow range and then shooting a bit and then getting stuck in rather than just charging.
Right.
And it's that timing when you go from shooting to closing that is probably the critical decision you make with an Indian army, in my view.
So if you're playing against it, they are likely to stop short of contact and hope for 2 or 3 turns of decent shooting against you, which is your opportunity to work their flanks, knowing that they're not quite tough enough to come in unless you've taken some hits.
Exactly.
I think one command will come forward, pin and shoot, whilst another one moves past, and then your objective is to get the enemy commands on the run from your elephants, and then you're moving 3, as you say, and then you keep the pressure on and people have to run away from you.
Yeah, I think that's possibly why I kind of like the look of that command in the Mariah one that almost doesn't have any shooters. It just is a get in, stuck in there.
That's the strike. That's the real.
But that pins the enemy down because it can just get stuck in. Whereas the other 2 are able to sit back. But yeah, you're not sitting back all the way along the line. You can actually just take the battle to them and cause the focus of attention where there's actually a lot of fighting going on.
The command with the guardsman either wins you or loses you the game.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Well, I think that's probably covered as much as there is to cover in the Indians. Actually, we've got a couple of different lists. We've talked about the chariots, we've talked about the wagons, we've even talked about the stampeding herd, and we've got some ways to play that. And and also had a quick run through of some of the more choice selections of figures to do. So, Richard, Dave, thank you very much, and we will reconvene shortly and pick on another list.